You're gonna draw? Stop.
In 2012, Sony Pictures released The Amazing Spider-Man, starring Andrew Garfield as the new web-slinger, with newcomer Mark Webb directing. The Amazing Spider-Man was a reboot to Sam Raimi's iconic Spider-Man trilogy, and to set itself apart from the countless other Spider-Man projects, The Amazing Spider-Man was set to tell a more realistic and personal story. This was a film that wouldn't be as campy as the Raimi films. No, The Amazing Spider-Man instead would attempt to tell a more grounded story, where Peter would go through a personal journey to not only discover his place in the world, but also uncover a grand mystery surrounding his parents' disappearance and the involvement of Oscorp. The first film was received relatively well. However, there was something strange when watching the movie for the first time. Certain clips seemed weirdly edited, scenes would abruptly end with no context to what happened, and certain characters seemed underdeveloped. This was due to the constant reshoots for the film, causing many scenes to be left on the cutting room floor. But luckily, many of these scenes exist on the internet for our viewing pleasure. So what exactly took place in these deleted scenes, and how did they narratively tie to the story, and would they have improved the viewing experience or the quality of the film in any way? In The Amazing Spider-Man, Uncle Ben's death is handled slightly differently from how his death is portrayed in the comics. In most comic depictions of Ben's death, we don't actually see the act take place. We see Peter arrive home after either a wrestling match or a live performance, and only finds out about Ben's death when he arrives. This narrative choice is meant to heighten the impact of the reveal, which means we learn the circumstance behind the death at the same time Peter does. However, The Amazing Spider-Man handled Uncle Ben's death slightly differently from the comics. In the film, Ben runs into the robber who had just recently robbed the convenience store. While he was running, he accidentally drops his gun near Ben, leading to a scuffle for the gun, which unfortunately leads to Ben's death. Peter, hearing the gunshot, would find Ben's body, leading directly to his evolution into Spider-Man. Now this scene is a bit controversial because some viewers have come to criticize Ben for his actions. Why would he ever attempt to wrestle a gun from a seemingly dangerous person to begin with? Well, as the movie makes clear, Uncle Ben, at least in this film, is a man of honesty and integrity. He believes in doing the right thing for the sake of it, and he's not afraid to be stern if he has to.
Did you humiliate that boy?
Yeah, I did. But this guy deserved it.
Did he?
Yeah.
You see the kid that hit you? Is he?
Yeah. Yeah, but...
So all this is about getting even? If so, I guess you must feel pretty good about yourself now, right? Am I right or wrong?
However, he's also a man who stands up for what's right, and based on dialogue from the film, this need to stand up for what he believes in may have led to a few scuffles in his past.
How's the other guy look? Come on, I know a right cross when I see one. Yes or no, do I have to call somebody's father?
This scene, where he attempts to wrestle the gun, is not out of place, as the film perfectly establishes that this is something he'd do. However, in a deleted scene for the film, this scene was handled very differently, and it's much closer to how he dies in the original comics. Instead of Ben fighting the robber for his gun, his death becomes a result of mistaken identity. As Ben tries to look for Peter, he sees a shadowy figure in the distance. This is the robber, but because of his silhouette, Ben mistakes him for Peter and follows him to a dark alleyway. We don't see Ben die on screen, we simply hear a gunshot, and it's left up to us to imagine how Ben got shot. It's hard to say for sure if this approach to Ben's death is better than the original, as emotionally both scenes achieve the same effect. The only difference is the way they're taken out, either through fighting for what's right or dying due to his love for Peter. The Lizard is the central antagonist of The Amazing Spider-Man, and the film very much portrays him as sympathetic, undone by his own desire to help others. Connors tries to achieve this through cross-species genetics, and with the help of Peter, he finally uncovers the breakthrough needed to successfully create the cure. This cure does not work the way he wanted it to, causing his body to transform into a giant lizard. However, it's not his body that undergoes change, but his very mind as well. For some reason, the serum has caused Connors to become highly volatile and irrational. He speaks in a panicked and frantic manner. He starts viewing his very dangerous condition as more of a gift he has to share with the world. While the film does a great job portraying Kurt's fall into madness, several deleted scenes would have expanded on this aspect of the character a bit more.
He's gonna stop me. He's gonna stop me. I'm afraid. I'm so afraid.
In one scene, Kurt admires the form he's taken, instead of seeing his lizard transformation as horrific and dangerous. He spews nonsense about how he's beautiful, while spit drips down his face.
I'm beautiful, aren't I? Beautiful.
He's clearly not in the right mind, and this scene helps demonstrate just how far gone he is. The lizard formula also visibly makes him more violent, shown in another deleted scene, where when he meets his son, he tells him it's okay to be violent and fight back against his bullies.
Your mother and I would always say, don't strike back. We were wrong. All these souls, lost and alone, I can save them. I can cure them. There's no need to stop me, Peter.
We see the extent of his delusions during the high school fight that takes place shortly after the sewer sequence. Now, after this battle in the original film, Lizard escapes back into the sewers to escape the police. However, the original approach to this scene was handled very differently. This fight is nearly identical for most of the sequence until the moment they enter the library.
Dr. Connors! This is not you! Stop it! Stop this right now!
Peter attempts to reach out to Kurt Connors' humanity and manages to actually reach him, leading Kurt to become confused and scared about what's happening, clearly trying to fight against his animalistic instincts. Lizard runs away and hides within the bathroom where Peter finds him. Kurt is hiding away in the corner, confused and scared. He begs Peter for help, seeing no one else he can turn to. Peter decides to help Kurt, leading them to escape to the sewers together. Now, before we move on to the next scene, there's one interesting detail I'd like to point out. During the fight in the library, Peter reveals his identity to Kurt, which directly leads to this mental breakdown. Now, this scene doesn't really make any sense, considering that Lizard already knew Peter was Spider-Man. This scene, of course, then, is meant to indicate how Kurt in his lizard form is even more animalistic and acts on instinct when compared to the final film, where you can clearly tell that Kurt is pretty much in control, even in his lizard form. In the original film, after Kurt escapes to the sewers, Peter would eventually follow him there, coming across all his research materials, which explains why Peter learns of his plans and eventually confronts him on top of a skyscraper. In the original deleted scene, Peter escorts Kurt to his lab after the school fight. Here we see their relationship develop a bit further as we come to understand why Kurt is so obsessed with making everyone like him.
Richard never let me read his notes. He didn't trust me. He knew how I felt. Incomplete. An aberration. You see, I dream of a world where everyone is equal, and thanks to you, Peter, I'm gonna make that happen.
Kurt wants to cure the world, as the film made clear. However, it's the existence of Peter as Spider-Man that reaffirms his beliefs and strengthens his motivations.
Would you go back? After all you know you can do, all the power you feel, would you give it all up?
So clearly there's an element of truth to Kurt's madness. From here, Peter figures out Kurt's plan in much the same way by viewing a computer with a simulation of what Kurt planned to do. However, this time, Peter is knocked out by the character Rajit Ratha, who followed them to the sewers and is quickly killed by the lizard right after. This character is kind of underutilized in the film, but he does have plenty of deleted scenes that develop his character a bit more. But in the final film, he kind of disappears after the first act. Peter is then presumably knocked out by the lizard, leading to the final act. So structurally, both scenes flow perfectly into the final act. It's just that the deleted scene did a better job establishing Kurt's motivations alongside Peter. Strangely, this deleted scene is still present in the final film in the form of an inner monologue from Kurt.
Would you give it all up? After all you know you can do, all the power you feel.
One scene showed Peter being confronted by Gwen's doorman, who prevents him from entering the building. This scene serves to provide context for why Peter enters Gwen's room from the fire escape. In the film, there's a scene where Peter swings Gwen through New York. Here we see an establishing shot of a clock tower. However, additional context is not provided as we move on to the next scene. The deleted scene reveals that Peter and Gwen were supposed to meet at this clock tower, sharing an intimate moment together. Perhaps this clock tower was meant as a form of foreshadowing, as Gwen would later die in a clock tower during The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The Amazing Spider-Man features a plethora of other scenes that fill in gaps in the narrative, such as Peter stalking Kurt's corners, explaining why he knew he was hiding out in the sewers. In the final film, Peter discovers this because his spider sense went off from seeing a lizard entering the sewer, which frankly makes no sense. One scene showed Kurt giving his condolences to Peter after the death of Uncle Ben, and shows Peter how his formula worked on the mouse, serving as a great form of bonding between the two. One scene seemed to show Kurt and his wife together, so obviously the film was meant to originally dive deeper into Kurt's family life, but this was obviously cut for time. Interestingly, one of the pre-visualizations shown for the film features an entirely unique and new action sequence that's not present in the final film, which likely means that it was never filmed to begin with. This scene shows Spider-Man fighting Lizard on a rooftop. Lizard and Spider-Man trade blows on walls as they blast through different buildings and use their environment to their advantage. Spider-Man is of course quick on his feet, maneuvering through obstacles with ease, while Lizard prefers to slam through anything in his path. This fight looks fantastic, and it's the type of vertical and chaotic action scene we don't see much from Spider-Man films. Now this fight is interesting because it's quite difficult to pinpoint where it takes place in the film. The pre-visualization is set in the daytime, meaning it could not have taken place before the bridge fight or shortly after. It couldn't have been after the school fight because narratively it's supposed to lead to the climax, which is set during the night, and it could not have been before the school fight because that would not explain how they ended up downtown. It could have taken place after the sewer fight, but again, this fight leads to the school fight, so narratively it makes no sense. The logical conclusion then is that this fight was replaced with a different battle. If I were to guess, this was the original version of the bridge fight. Now hear me out. The visualization begins with Lizard observing a taxi moving through the city. Why put emphasis on a taxi moving and the Lizard trying to find it? Well, in the final film, we know the Lizard is in search of a taxi in order to find the character Rajit Ratha. However, since it's very hard to find a script for the film, this is simply speculation on my part. Perhaps a viewer watching this knows the full story behind this clip. Please share it if you do. The rest of the deleted scenes in the film aren't very significant, either being extended action scenes or an extended POV shot of Peter swinging through the city, which we already see in the trailer. There's also an extended parkour sequence, which was meant to show Peter testing out his powers in additional ways.